I can't see a thing.
Maybe I use
Also, I need to do this. Okay. All right. So, welcome to this IETF 97 in Seoul and a DM session. So, welcome everybody. Get started. I hope you are all aware of the changes in the tool system, whatever. So the agendas might not always be visible, for example, tool side, but they are there in a data tracker and stuff. So I've heard that people had some confusions around. But anyway, they all have been uploaded and available. So for today, we don't have the usual packed agenda, which is okay. So I'll just run quick through what we. I can do this. Well, you can, yeah, okay. Yeah. So I will just pull down. So Tapeng is going to do the quick update. So I haven't checked the emails this morning. So did someone volunteer as a note taker? Oh, excellent. Thank you, Charlie. So I'll offer you a bottle of water.
Okay, so we have four drafts. We just submitted for IESG review. The first one, I guess this morning, Charlie submit a new version. So after that, we will review and submit that one, the new one, to IESG for review. And the remaining three drafts is the home network prefix renumbering, and the LMA controlled MAC session parameters, and the on-demand mobility management. Okay, that's a quick update.
Yeah, and then the MAC multi-homing, so that's pending a write-up. So the IPR call has been done recently. So once I get those, it will be progressed. Then we had an adoption call on the RFC 5149 bis. So no one was opposing it, so it will be part of the mobile IPv6 maintenance part. So that work is fairly complete. It dates back to NetEx days, so the draft has been sitting there for a couple of years. And the authors will most likely just update it and the look whether it's still valid, whether it addresses all the issues that we received from the field, and then we just push it through. So that work is pretty much done already. And then we have still the three other drafts like deployment models, distributed anchoring, and the FPC document. And and we are going to hear the updates on those today. And once they are done, we most likely forward them into a publication queue. Okay. So we might have some small adjustment on the agenda. So Danny Moses, who had a slot on the DHCP extensions, so he's stuck somewhere between San Francisco and Seoul. Okay, excellent, good. So he's not stuck anymore. So he's here. So then we don't have an adjustment in agenda. Good. Yeah. Anyway, so we will just wait until the Danny rise and make sure that he can have his slot. Okay. Let's move forward. So we'll hear the update of from the Anthony. And I'll pull up the slides. So yeah. Let me see.
So yeah, only one question before you move on.
Okay.
So we presented the virtual CP draft few IETFs last one or maybe the before. So we never, chairs never issued a adoption call. So at that time, the feedback was like, how do we tie into FPC and other things? So that we did an update, providing the linkage to FPC and how the interface will be used. But nothing else was done after that.
Yeah. So yeah, I recollect that thing. Since last IETF, we have most kind of trying to kind of clean the table for the most part, and we surely will look into it again. So it's not forgotten. So, but let's see.
Can we issue an adoption call after this IETF or?
Well, I can ask the kind of feel of the room, but I wouldn't be running the actual call yet. So if that shows that people actually are really interested about it, I mean, not only the authors. So
I think like any other DMM draft, it's the same level of interest. That's my personal reading, right? I think it's nothing, nothing that it doesn't have interest or has too much of interest. It's the same, it's consistent level of attention. Yeah.
okay. All right. So give me a second. I'll pull up your slides.
So this is an update of the revisions from maybe enlarge it to the full screen.
Oh, it's true.
Oh.
How do I get rid of that?
The workgroup draft was 00 and now it's 02. So I'm going through the changes in from 00 to 01 and then from 01 to 02. We just got it. We just got the full screen already.
Yeah, but it's not showing full screen there.
It shows full screen. It's okay.
It's not okay. Sorry, but I'm in a slow motion now.
So we had so in the first slide, I showed the updated table of contents.
Oh, great.
Can you go to the review now? The review tab.
So it'd be showing the new table of content and then go over the solutions. We went through the solution before, but I'm just going through the changes that have been done. Yeah, this is. Oh.
Sorry about I'm doing this. I'll have some more space here.
So the organization is that we put down the different configurations. After all the different configurations, then it defines the functions and what they are able to do. And after that, we went through using that to go through a few solutions. So that was the organization of the jobs.
How can, okay. Too many years of Windows again.
So the presentation this time is basically to solicit inputs from everybody. It would be good to have the input before the meeting, but we didn't receive comments from the email. So I hope we can get more of the comments.
Yeah, whatever. Let me figure this out. Sure. Nothing is going to help me out here.
You have to set.
Okay.
In trying to write this draft, we had done the best we can to refer to the other draft, like the architecture, the solutions, like the message and so on that are defined in other draft and the use of the different draft. So it's related to other draft. How many people have read the draft? Oh, thanks. Are there any comments anyway? Okay, thanks. I think that's good enough. So in section 3, is basic because this draft is on the work. This work team is on enhanced anchoring. So we define what the anchors are. So we put down the different configuration. In the past draft, in the previous draft, the figures were all condensed together, a lot of information turned into one. So we split them into different figures, into 4 different ones, with a flat network, with hierarchical network, and then with host-based mobility support, and then network-based, and then network mobility at the 4 different configurations that are possible. And with that, we define the operations and parameter in terms of the location and the forwarding management. So that's the organization of it. And in each of them, we elaborate what they are supposed to do in more detail than in the COCO draft. So we try to go through a number of possibilities. So the next slide, please. And after defining them, then we go through the different solutions. In section 4 is that if the mobility is either not needed or needed, that was basically related to the work team number, work team 1 related to that. And then when it's needed, so we go to section 5. Oh, and in each one, we put down the guidelines on what to do. Some of the comment we had offline discussion is that it doesn't give you enough information on how to deploy it. So we put down some guidelines in each of those solutions. We don't want to because this is information job, so we don't want to say that this is you must be doing this. So we just call them guidelines on what the nodes are supposed to have those functions in terms of the functions and parameters that are already defined in section 3. So in section 5, we go deeper into a flat network and then the guidelines, and then switched with a centralized control plane. So basically going step by step, adding one thing again, and then putting this control centralized plan, and then put in a hierarchical structure. After having the hierarchical structures, like putting the level in it, and then it is very similar to the LMA and the MAC into level. And after that, when you change the MAC into a host, that's basically a host space mobility. So it goes to putting the architecture and then the host. So in version 1 and 2, 0 and 01, we did some of the functions before, but they were not very elaborate. So we elaborate that as much as we can. And if you missed anything, please tell us and what to do. And then the description of the different scenarios also, and we added the guideline. I mean, in the past version, we only described those solutions without calling them guidelines. And now we make it more systematic, call them guidelines and what to do in those nodes. So to help the deployment. And then the next one is from 01 to 02. We clean up some of the things in it, and also added the security description that was revised, and we also added a case in which the mobile node is a mobile router as a obvious extension of the whole space mobility. And then the next slide was the case that doesn't need mobility support. This figure was already presented last time, but I just put it as a placeholder. You don't need mobility support. So the IP1 on the left-hand side and go to new network using IP2. And then the next slide was also presented last time is to basically move the anchoring from network 1 to network 2. So after it moved to network 2, it's still using the old IP address, and by changing the anchoring to the new point. And then the third, and then the next slide is to build a hierarchy between them. And after we build the hierarchy, and then if the bottom one, which is the mobile, the functions are all in the first and the upper two part. And we are using the terminology from the architecture called DPA, DPN, and so on to get hierarchy. And then when the DPN takes the role of the MM, so in the next slide, that's basically the whole space mobility. So it goes directly from the anchor right to the mobile node. And then once you do that, if the mobile node is a network, if it's a router, it can carry a network. That will be next slide. Then it becomes the network-based. That becomes the network mobility. So by just doing the prefix delegation, the prefix is dedicated to the mobile router, so it can carry a network. So those are the changes we have to make it try to make it more complete and more easy to follow in the deployment. I'm not expecting to give a long presentation, but rather to hear your comments.
Okay, so Anthony, do you think this draft is now ready? Like a
Because we didn't hear any comments, so how can we have to
well,
get some
well,
comments before we-
you are an author, so you should have an idea of whether your work is done from your side.
we did the best we can, but then
Okay.
who knows? There should be some advice from all of you.
Yeah, because what I want to know is like whether I start moving this forward or not.
Okay.
That would mean a working group last call.
Yeah. What we hope is to ask for comment, and if we had comment, we would quickly fix those comments very quickly, and then
Okay.
move to the last call.
Well, we can.
But if there are no comments, then what?
Well,
Then we just move.
and maybe we can
Maybe.
bundle those.
Maybe we can ask her first. How many people read this new version of the draft? Yeah. Okay.
All right. So this particular draft has been around for a long time. So, and it's individual version. So, what I'm thinking, I'm just going to initiate the working group last call on this one, and then I urge everyone to kind of read it and comment on it, and we at least run one even or as many as we need of this working group last call so that we can get this one moving forward. This is one of the pending milestones that we have. So,
Okay.
okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Anthony. So let me try again. I got some good guidance how to do that. Let me try whether this works better now. Oh yes. Thank you, Sri. Okay, so we go on with the agenda, and the next one is going to be sale. I'll bring up your stuff. And we also got the, if you need the laser sword, it's up there. Okay. Okay, looks good now.
Nothing's good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Seljan.
You need to say me when I switch slides. What do you want? This one is the laser. Yeah.
Just go to the titles, please. There.
Hmm?
Go to the title. Back. Go back.
Okay.
Please. Yeah, this is the title is that use cases and API extension for source IP address selection, and this now version is that 05 version, and now we have 4 authors currently, and okay. So, and actually, this draft was presented before 2 times before, and now is the 3rd presentation in Seoul meeting, and I know that, and a couple of people have already read and show their interest in this my draft, and also I could get some very interesting and meaningful feedbacks from this active member. So we want to go one time more and to give and this presentation, and also want to get some about some adoption call here. In a nutshell, repeating that about the core idea and briefly, this is about the use cases and analysis of the DMM on-demand mobility working group document. As you know that this DMM on-demand mobility is present in the 3 types of the source IP address prefix. One is that fixed, and another is the session resting IP address prefix, and another is that the nomadic. I don't know that but Tom has been changed that in recent version that I don't know that this given Tom is reflect this the recent update. Anyway, that this Tom was already the code before. I believe that you have been familiar with this term. The international fixed IP address support mobility in terms of session continuity and IP address reachability. But session lasting IP address support only session continuity. Nomadic doesn't support any mobility. The point is that we just give some analysis in this draft with use cases, and we also proposed an API to address gap we identify from this analysis study. Okay, go. So as I said before, it was given 2 times, and for the current 0.5 version now has been revised for clarity, and thanks to Danny and also John and from Huawei. So I believe that now this version gives more clear understanding and what idea this draft is really intending to show and to address. Go. So motivation is that with figure, I would like to describe this idea very briefly and focusing on this core idea and the core problem statement. Then in a nutshell is that, for example, in their networks, there are 3 serving networks, and each served network has a different sustained IP prefix ranges. So yeah, nowadays that we call that the session resting IP address, but I think sustained can be can call here. When terminal attached this network, there was application and it got this sustained IP prefix and it got configured in the IP stack. But terminal just moved to the new network, new serving network, and a new application 2 just initiated. And basically, we can expect that the new local sustained IP prefix will get assigned to this terminal, right? But the issue is that which sustained IP prefix we have to configure for this application 2. As already that sustained IP address is existing in this kernel. And what about this case is that the terminal moves to the new serving networks. And that there will be, for example, that preferences and a requirement for application flow. We think there will be something different. And I believe that even there is any fixed way, it will not be desired behavior. So issue would be, please go to next. We found is that acquiring a new session lasting IP address may take some time every time. Once it get attached to a new serving networks, it will may take some time due to the exchange with these networks. For example, that even the stateless and the stateful procedure. But on the contrary, that using an existing sustained IP address will be beneficial in terms of that we can use it very instantly. In another hand, using existing one might yield less optimal routing. But depending on the mobility, distances, that speed, and there are something that we cannot say in a one comments, but we can also say that it will produce some less optimal routing. So my point is that it may not be preferred by newly initiated application. So what will be good? So go next. Another issue we found is that there are some error, and from RFC 3484, there are default address selection for IP version 6, right? And there are many rules there. For example, and rule 8, there are use longest matching prefix. For example, that so possibly, and the source IP address will be selected with a comparison of the source address and the destination address comparison. So possibly that if there are more common prefix length is matched, and its source IP address will be selected. So this may also lead undesired behavior in the source IP address selection rule. Yes, actually it was it was standardized quite long times before. Maybe that there will be something new selection rules for the DMM in the store and DMM environment. So the next, so what we are proposing is that Yeah, we just call this on-net property with this API. On-net property means that actually application, when its application request or sustain a session resting IP address, if really want to get this newly allocated sustain IP, so session resting IP prefix, and it need to that invoke another additional this API by socket API interfaces. So it will require that, okay, I want to get this, that the newly, initiated and the newly assigned from this current serving networks, this prefix, it will assign and it will configure this, and it will be used for this, application. So it is side here, and it will always that give, and it's a preferred, and the routing behaviors and some, for example, like we can expect those kind of things. That the point is that we will reflect that what application really want in terms of the selection of the source IP address type and any something metric really application want to do. So go please. So really, and then I hope that now if this version is ready to go for adoption as a working group documents, and I really hope that your comments and to go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Suresh Krishnan, Azeri. I'm actually a bit confused, right? So why is this not part of on-demand mobility?
In on-demand mobility.
Yeah. So like, why is this a separate document? Why can't you just like fold, like the document is now in my queue, right? But why wasn't this document has existed for more than 2 years now, right? Like, so why wasn't this included in that?
Yeah, actually, I I requested this should be. I just that made this issue, and I contacted this this author and also sent this mail, the mailing list. But I don't know. But actually, this they wanted to go with this base document, not taking this kind of something optimization or this kind of the preference, just defining that basic, just the 3 types of the on-demand mobility address types.
So to be very frank with you, right, there's not enough meat in this document to go forward, right? Like it doesn't like make sense to publish this as a separate document. Like, so if the working group feels that this is something that's important, I would send the document back to the working group and get consensus to add it back in, because like for this explanation of use cases, like it doesn't make sense to publish. So there's like going to be an IESC statement coming forward, like probably very, very soon. We just approved it on Sunday, this yesterday, talking about like these classes of documents, which are like more useful for the working group than for the community, which has archival value. And this kind of fits in that pattern. Okay. So personally for me, I don't see the value of publishing this separately. Okay. Not that I don't see the value of it. I just don't see the value of publishing it separately from on-demand mobility. Okay. So either the working group has consensus to include this one additional flag in there and write about the use cases, or it doesn't. And in either case, like it doesn't have to be a separate document.
Actually, that I really want to ask this, but for example, I just brought this one just API and on this that problem statement, and but actually, if really want to, I mean, if that consensus and the comment is given that okay, that maybe that there will be more additional flag will be needed, that taking that any further the consideration and preference, that I will really willing to go more to revise this document. But if this API only will be enough, that as you just commented, that also we can try to incorporate this in the base document.
Right, like so, and that's up to the chairs and the group to figure that out. But I'm just saying, like, either there's value to add this, in which case it belongs in the other document, or it doesn't. There's no value, in which case we don't want to publish it. Those are my 2 options in my head. Right?
Okay.
Okay. And another thing, technical point, like 3484 has been outdated for like obsoleted for like 4 years now, right? So and specifically for Rule 8, like Rule 8, there's like text in I think 60 to 84, which or 74, 60 to 74 or 84, whatever updated it. It actually says like you don't have to take what's coming out of Rule 8. if you have a better way of figuring out if it's valid or not. Okay, so there's like specific escape text, and this was like an issue that was considered.
But
in
I
sixth
think
line.
that is the matter of that somehow we can arrange this priority of this, API option tab.
Right. And if you go back like one slide, right? Okay, it says like it may lead to undesired behavior in source IP. The specific text after Rule 8 in the 6274, which actually says that you may override this.
So actually, I checked the draft actually refers to a correct version of the source after selection. So the slides are referring to old one.
Ah,
So,
but I will check this again.
Go ahead. Come to the mic. Come to the mic. Yeah, please. The rule is still there, but there's like text after that which says like, if there's a better way of doing this, do it. Don't follow this rule. I understand, but if you look at the end of the rule, if you actually read the text below the rule, right, it actually says, if you have a better way of doing this, do it. Don't follow this rule, right? And that was like specifically things that added where like this longest prefix match didn't make sense. And that was like one of the main reasons for doing the 3484 bis.
Suresh, but that's general text, right? You need more specific text, in relation to the DMM extensions.
Exactly. And what I'm saying is if you need specific text, it goes into on-demand mobility in the document. Like I don't want a separate document for a document that's not even published yet. Does that make sense? Like
what point is that? You mean that going to the DMM on-demand documents, not just the default address selection documents, right?
To the on-demand mobility, yeah.
Yeah.
So my question is like, what in here does not belong in on-demand mobility, and why? And I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah.
Right? I could take all these things, I put like all the use case stuff into an appendix or into a separate section, and add the additional flag in there, and I don't see an issue if the working group wants to go with that, right? If the working group wants this additional flag in there, I just don't want a separate document for the sake of a separate document, especially since it's not even a milestone for the group, right?
Yep.
So that's it. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So kind of repeating what has been said. So I didn't really figure out myself what would be the big enhancement of this this new flag or option. But kind of okay. So I just want to know what the room thinks. So that you probably understand the consequences. So the on-demand mobility has been kind of shipped out of the working group. It's no issue. It has been done multiple times in past that something turns up, it gets pulled back to a working group. Working group works on the document, something gets added. We run the working group last call. The chair writes the checkout writes a new protocol write-up, and there it goes again. So it's just a respin of things. It's business as usual, but it really depends on the working group. If you want to do this. So what I would like to hear now is let's just do a quick show of hands. So who thinks that we need to bring the on-demand mobility document back to a working group and add the contents of the draft that was just presented in some way, in some form, into the existing working group document what we have. So if you think that we should do that, please raise your hand. Did everybody understand what I was asking? So you are not showing your hand?
Including me, yes.
Okay. Who thinks that we shouldn't bring the working group document back from the ISG back to a working group and work on it? Just let it go as it is today. Okay, we have one on that. All right. So this was for the AD. This was pretty clear indication. So we will bring it back to a working group and continue working it. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So Krishnan again. So like just like explaining like what like Yoni said, and Yoni can like disagree with me, is that like he's just bringing the document back to figure out if it needs to get added. I don't think the working group is committing to adding the stuff. Just to make sure that's clear, right?
Yeah, so good that you brought it up. So that means that the document comes back to a working group. So it means that we reopen it, and what happens then? What happens? So okay.
So what is next consequence then? I need to do.
Well,
You just open.
so
this.
what happens is that the Suresh is going to put the document back in the working group, and then you need to somehow get the people actually agree that we need it. I mean, I need to have the kind of things set in a mailing list that we want to have it. This is like a straw man poll what we had here.
But Yoni, we agree with the issues, right? That's why we are bringing it back.
Yes.
Why not agree with the merger and be done with it?
Well, yeah, but if someone outside, not in this working group, goes suddenly against it in heavily, then you need to somehow use your baseball bat and make him or her to be silent. So you know what it means. So
You mean that you will try to get the consensus in the mail list again, right?
well, I can run this again on mailings. I just want to kind of, it's kind of for documentation purposes. So someone who wasn't present in this meeting needs to kind of understand what was decided. And the same people who raised their hand should say yes, and that's it. And then the poor editor has to add it in a form that
Without
everybody's happy.
initiating that those in the mailing list, how people can answer with the.
Well, I do that.
You'll do that.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
that's the burden of the chair.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. All right. I was thinking that I was showing this one, 6724, but it's kind of gone now. But there is this explicit text saying that you can overrule the rule 8. So I was highlighting it nicely on my own screen. Okay. All right. Let's go on. So the next one in a row is going to. Is Danny already in a room? No, okay. So we will have a remote presentation of, I don't know how that's going to work out. So we have a Lyle remotely presenting the implementation status of the FPC. See how it's supposed to work out. I've never done this before. Okay, so okay, so Lyle is coming to a queue. Okay.
Hey, can anyone hear me? Hey.
Oh, yes. Great. So Lyle, I have your slides up here.
Yeah, go ahead.
And just say when I press the enter key so I can progress it. So stage
Okay.
is yours.
Next slide, please. So in version 4, we added an implementation status regarding a couple of implementations from Sprint. we had two projects, FPC Agent and FPC. FPC Agent was a version 3 Model 1. We're not doing any more work on it because we moved to Model 4. The big thing with Model 4 is it's a full implementation. We're intending and we're going through our internal processes to open source. And we're really looking at a couple of key investigations. Our biggest one right now is whether or not we can make RESTconf basically useful for the speeds for call processing in terms of what we're expecting to do with FPC. And then the other thing we're looking at is complexity of implementation. Next slide. So the project is an open daylight or Java-based design. We're already compatible with the ODL licensing, IPR-free, which is where we currently have the document at. As far as features, if you're familiar with the FPC specification, we are a multi-DPN agent. We currently support the conf messages. The conf bundles isn't thoroughly tested, but it's there. We've also added the ability to bind a client through a single API to a tenant. That's not in the spec, but it just allows us to kind of speed up a lot of our processing and research. We also use HTTP and 0MQ, which is somewhat SETP influenced for transport. Part of that is that we are bound to a data plane node that uses 0MQ. And the other thing that we do is that we use 0MQ as a reference against HTTP, TCP more appropriately in terms of some of our research with respect to basically speeds for RESTconf. So as I mentioned before, we do have a 0MQ DPN API, and we do actually support both of the models that are described in the FPC spec, which is the ability for the agent to assign many of the things, including the DPN and its IP address and any sort of associated tunnel information. And then we have the standard support where the client is defining everything for us. And we're basically then doing the standard agent to DPN adaptation. Next slide, please. So the performance is actually something we were most worried about. And what we did was break up using the OK notify follows method that's in the protocol specification, the ability for a client to send a request to have the agent then very quickly send back information, and at the same time queue into another system the communications downstream to the DPN. You can see the numbers here. Most of the time that we spend in processing FPC, at least in the RESTconf-based method, is just parsing the JSON. In fact, what we found is these numbers are actually a little bit generous for the JSON parsing. It's a little bit higher than that. But in general, 75 to almost 80, in some cases 90% at higher speeds of our processing time is just parsing the JSON. And then we have, depending upon the situation, what's being provisioned, a very quick time over, in this case, 0MQ to communicate with the DPN. Using Open Daylight Beryllium, which is our base reference implementation, we were able to achieve, excuse me, a peak rate of 8,700 TPS with this. And then obviously, if you're using something else, it's there. The one thing that we would point out is when we did this, depending on when garbage collection was kicked in and when we were running the test, it could consume between 8 and 12 cores of a CPU. And we would also note the code is not optimized. It's very much focused on features and functionality and trying to get at least some baseline information that's there. Now, as a part of this in terms of speed, and we'll talk about it in a little bit in the next discussion, we made heavy use of the operation reference command, option, which allows us to basically cut short any sort of cache search The client has the ability just basically to send specific messages to let us know as an agent builder that all of the information is contained inside the agent or in the message, and we don't have to do any sort of significant searches inside the cache itself. We also use the command set that was introduced in version 4. This allows us to take a very large JSON structure and figure out exactly what the client is after in terms of communication. Otherwise, we spend a tremendous amount of time sorting through the structure, trying to guess or estimate whether or not we can complete one or a number of transactions between the agent and the DPN. The biggest takeaway for us, because we were quite skeptical, was that RESTconf actually has a much higher speed than we thought. Maybe we were just pessimistic. But with just the stock Beryllium Open Daylight, we're getting some decent speeds in terms of transactions per second. Next slide. So the takeaways, I mean, realistically, it really depends on your load and how many DPNs you're running, as well as the types of mobility applications you have. But 8700 can be actually a decent amount for some nodes. We've seen some LTE call models where basically 1,000 TPS is good enough, if you will, for 250,000 users. But I would say the number is subjective. It really depends upon how you're configuring your agent, your DPNs, and your network. The other question you have is, do you really want the SDN, in our case, this agent doing just the work, or shouldn't you be using other plugins? We are taking a look at the unoptimized code and the latency, but we are interested in understanding methods by which we can reduce that 75 to 80% consumption. The system was close to feature complete, but we've removed a few things as the code gets out towards open source, and we're really just trying to push for some basic conformance testing right now. But overall, we're happy with the changes made with the version 4 spec and our ability to actually put some code quickly behind it. And that's it. And yeah, we've just got a couple of slides for reference in back there for people to look at offline.
Okay. So just a quick question from my side. So is this implementation something like that you are running just in a lab, or are you actually doing something in a real production environment or going there?
We are intending to go there next year.
Okay.
Hello. Another question is this project is already part of the Open Daylight project?
It is not.
Individual.
It is not.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. It's kind of interesting to hear that someone is actually implementing these things and putting them into real deployments. Okay, good. Thank you. So I think we continue on the same topic. So I saw that Danny came in the room, but we take complete first. This is FPC stuff, and then you can kind of cover. So next we have Marco, I think.
Right, so you just heard about an implementation of what's being presented now. And this is the actual draft and specification behind the implementation Lai reported about. Is it on? You hear? It should be. Okay. Next one. All right. So referring back to the status of last IETF in version 3, we had different models how to deploy the client and agent. So this work is just to repeat again, about separating mobility management control plane from data plane. And we adopt the following architecture, which is a forwarding policy configuration client and agent. And the agent can be placed on a single data plane node, like a switch or a router, or it can be placed on a network controller, and the network controller per se is then responsible for multiple physical data plane nodes. So these two different deployments we have in mind. And for these two different deployments, we had two models being specified in version 3, which was not clear at all. And we received a couple of comments, including very valuable comments from Charlie and from Pete about this. So we tried to address this in version 4 and 5 to make it much more clean. And from how you organize the data being configured from the control plane in the data plane, we now have a common data model. So it's a bit more structured compared to version 3. In addition, there is an abstraction object being specified to abstract the actual data plane towards the control plane. And this is what we briefly want to summarize in the following slides. All right, you see the two deployment models again. So these were model 1 and model 2 in version 3, which had different command sets, different data models behind. Now we harmonized this. We have a common data model. We have a common set of control messages to drive these two deployments. We call that single DPN, agent DPN as data plane node. So here you have the agent function deployed on a single physical data plane node. The multi-DPN agent places the agent on a network controller, like an SDN controller, for example. So the agent then actually needs to handle multiple physical data plane nodes below it. In version 4 and version 5, we introduced a new data model, which compared to version 3 has more of these conceptual structures. So version 3 had mainly the rules, which specified and described how different traffic for the different mobile nodes is treated. So encapsulation in terms of QoS. Here we have more structures being introduced. So first of all, version 4 introduces topology. So if you separate the control from the data plane, not all the details of a physical data plane node may be needed to be exposed to the control plane. So we introduce some level of abstraction. So the control plane just needs to know which data plane node supports which features to enable a selection, for example, of a data plane node that supports encapsulation, which is important for a home agent. So this kind of topology is being represented in the current data model. Also, policy describes configuration in the data plane that can be reused during mobility registration. So topology as well as policy is data that we assume can be pre-configured. And pre-configuration is one of the essential components of the updates in version 4 and 5, leveraging pre-configuration to actually accelerate the configuration during a mobile node's attachment, as well as to mitigate the information that needs to be transmitted over this interface, which is between the client and the agent. So if you can refer to something pre-configured, you just need to reference it during an attach of a mobile node and add the data which is individual to the mobile node, like a GRE key for encapsulation, for example. So in that optimization, that was also what I was reporting about. Then during a mobile node registration, so the mobility session related data, it's held in a structure which we call context. So the context represents the mobility session related data and referencing whatever can be pre-configured in topology and policy. Regarding the commands in operation, in version 4 and 5, these are common and aligned with the new data model. For example, to create a mobile node session context when the mobile node attaches to the control plane. How pre-configured data can be reused. So how do you reference to already existing data like a data plane node, like a pre-configured tunnel that can be shared, and how the data plane nodes can be selected on agent level or on control plane level based on the abstraction model, which we call topology. So that's the main changes, and many things in terms of text and clarification changed from version 3 to version 4. We provided before IETF 97 a new update on version 5, which even adds more clarification. So here, based on the comments we received from Charlie and Pete already, but mainly based on version 3, we hope to get more comments on the current version 5 to really see if what's clear to us, to authors, and makes a lot of sense, it's understandable to the community. To allow this specification helps to implement. Next one. So this has been shown a couple of times, and on the left-hand side, you see the two different data models which we introduced in version 3 to operate the two different modes, mode 1 and 2. Though it looks more simplistic, on the right-hand side, we harmonized that to use the same data models for both kind of operation, multi and single VPN agents. And here you see visualize the topology information which groups data plane nodes. There are certain types if they can act as an anchor data plane node or access data plane node. So this is being covered in the new specification and is assumed to be pre-configured. Same as for policies. So here you can specify policies that are common and also can be shared for different configurations like filtering, traffic shaping, or even forwarding related policies. And then when mobile nodes attach, the control plane actually specifies the context which is associated with a mobility session. So communication endpoints, mobility related information. So that's set up during runtime and referencing to pre-configured data on data plane as well as on policy level. Next one. All right. Due to the abstraction of the data plane node and the associated data model, which introduces data plane nodes, data plane node groups, which then are associated with the domain. So that reminds a lot about current discussions at various sites about network slicing. So in terms of how these terms are being treated in this specification, there are some things to be clarified. I'm not sure, Satoru, if you want to briefly comment on these slides, what you would like to clarify.
Yes, this is Satoru Matsushima. So the current abstraction model of the data plane is available to provide multi-tenancy, which utilizes single data plane network to multiple kind of the mobile operator, MVNO, etc. But each of the tenant which operate kind of the control plane and also the application which require a data plane, they utilize that tenant network within kind of the domain. So each tenant can have the multiple domain for them. And then those who define the domain which have the multiple, which consisted by multiple DPN. This is kind of the abstract DPN. That abstract DPN map to real deployed data plane node within the data plane network. So that's what this picture shows in visual.
I think you have follow-up slides on that, right?
So that because this is a bit difficult to show that that picture in the draft by text, so we couldn't reach to distinguish the difference between the abstracted DPN in the FPC agent, but in the DPN in the real deployment network. So I think we have to recognize the difference, each of them. So so I would like to ask to how we use that terminology correctly to distinguish them. That's this slide showed that. Sorry, that's what I mentioned in the previous picture. So the domain vs network slice, the domain concept in FPC is very similar with network slice, which is described in the white paper of NGMN and also 3GPP TR 23.799. So we really need to liaise to them in terms of the network slicing, but I think we need to align a lot more beyond on the network slicing, but also the messaging between the C plane and the D plane. Sorry.
No, I think it's a valid point. Question is, we should discuss it now if you want to have feedback now, or just present it and receive feedback offline. Someone has a view on that, you may just comment it now.
Yeah, I think even someone have a comment or question, or it's really welcome.
So you're actually saying that we should liaise with the 3GGP and the right. So what would you actually want to get, like exactly what would you want to tell them or ask from them?
At least in the term of network slicing, that's not so much clear for us because the IETF doesn't have the concept for network slicing. But tomorrow, some party has the discussion about that. But if we adopt that terminology in the IETF, I think it would be a good thing to align the industry for using the same terminology in the similar concept. So that's what I want to relay to them from the IETF.
Okay.
So Sadaru-san, I thought slice is more about splitting a hardware resources, right? Essentially sharing the hardware resources. So I'm trying to understand if I'm not sure if I agree that domain and network slice are the same. Right. But even if you take the 3G, I do not know. I don't know if there's an authority. Yeah. I'm asking a general question. I don't know if there's any authority on this, but 3G slice is such a very 3GPP specific term. So I don't know. I'll let him.
Seljan, actually, I see that network slicing has nowadays that there are many virtualization techniques that it can enable that multiple networks over the same one single physical networks. But I mean, when it comes to network slicing, yes, there are some definition now is being made by the many community and the many standardization body. But I believe network slicing has more constraint and the requirement rather than just that network virtualization and overlay and the tenant concepts, because that depending on the use cases with this FPC, you may say network slicing or the other. But I believe that calling that the domain slicing and network slicing will not be an issue of this draft. Maybe you can focus on this, that about what will be enabled by this FPC. That'll be enough. Just that you can simply code this, virtual tenants, or I think that'll be enough.
I just have some reinforcement to say the three. So my comment is kind of we were happy if 3 is the authority of the network slicing definition.
I think it's, I'm not saying, it's not about the authority. The question is, I'm not sure what it strikes. I think that's the point I'm saying.
So just saying one, so from the purpose of this document, I would think like in the intro part of the terminology part, you actually describe what is your view of things, and then you use whatever terminology you have. You don't need to necessarily try to align with the exact terms that are still kind of floating around. You know what is the kind of where your work kind of fits in, and you describe and define your own terms if needed. So from that part, I don't really personally, so this is like my non-working group chair hat on, so I don't think like why should actually go and ask them, because 3GP is still going to work on their stuff. It's going to move on, probably change. So within this draft scope, you can define and you can say that in our view, and referring to this 3GP document, we talk about domain, but it fits like in 3GP slicing concept in this way. So that kind of clarification should probably be added into a document if there's uncertainty but I don't think, honestly, I think that sending a license statement to 3GP saying something about this, it's like the best thing what happens is it gets noted. Yeah, but yeah, the highest achievement is to get it noted in a meeting. So I would just like look into what is said in 3GP and kind of describe that in our language in the scope of this document, and be fine. The other part, should a 3GP be aware of this work? I think that was also something that you were after. So that's okay. Sending license statement is one way of doing that. It might be okay. Actually, the best way of influencing is that someone who is actually active in 3GP kind of contributes to work there. So that's the best way it goes forward. So the strongest thing is to get the dependency to 3GP spec, and that way it never gets forgotten, and then 3GP will take care that we don't forget the work. Okay.
So I want to add another point on the network slicing thing. I think it's not a 3GPP specific term, because I remember that I wrote a draft several years ago. I used the term network slicing. It comes from the SDN concept. So, Charlie, please.
I'm Charlie Perkins. Can you go back to the picture that shows a couple of tenants and the domains, and that one right there? So I can sort of understand about slicing and domain being related to each other, but unless I'm missing something, it seems like tenant is like you might have multi-tenants in the network, and they pay for some slices, and they get to use the resources according to those slices. So, for instance, I have a couple of questions about this, but the first thing is where it says tenant A, couldn't it just as well be that there was tenant A and B, where tenant A was using MAG and LMA, and tenant B was using SGW, SGSN, and so on? In other words, tenant B had 2 slices and tenant A had 1 slice. Wouldn't that be feasible? Okay. I'm trying to make sure. I really want to understand it. That's why I'm asking. Okay. So that's one thing. Another thing is that as it's shown there, there's I guess you would say a local endpoint and a remote endpoint for domain 1A, and similarly for 2A and NA. And it looks like the local endpoint for domains 1A, 2A, and NA are actually instantiated on DPN2, and the remote endpoint is on DPN1 for what's currently being paid for by tenant A. So what it means to me is that when you're actually discussing what a domain is, you always include both the initiating endpoint and the other endpoint, the remote endpoint. And the difference is that you have a lot of context about what's on the local one because you know where the hardware is and the addresses, and you know perhaps a little less about the actual processing context of the remote endpoint. Is that correct? Okay. So I'm not completely misunderstanding this. So could you go back to the other picture before this that showed more back? It's that right there. So there you have pictures of multi-DPN agents, and they have a certain, let's say, model in mind. And then on the left-hand side, you're making room for something like an SDN controller that actually can be managing multiple, let's say, DPNs. So there's a little bit of overloading of terminology because at the top you have this multi-DPN agent thing. And then, for instance, on the right-hand side, there's these other things that are labeled agents. And presumably, they're not DPN agents. There's some other kind of agent. Are they FPC agents? It's so flexible that it's hard to understand.
Yeah. Could you use mic, please?
Yeah, please
Could
come
you
to
use
the mic,
mic?
because I think this is, I mean, at least I'm feeling a little bit lost. And
Sometimes I do. Okay, so we have an FPC client and FPC agent. Okay, all the agents that you see here are FPC agents. FPC. No, there are also FPC agents. An agent could be so it's a function, right? It could be associated with one DPN, and as so will receive commands from an FPC controller and use some specific API to configure the DPN if it's associated with that DPN. But we also allow an agent to be associated with more than one DPN if the implementation requires that. Okay, we keep that flexible. So when, for example, when an FPC controller sends a message to an agent, it might also indicate the DPN ID because this agent might be associated with more than one DPN. On the left-hand side, you also see an FPC agent, but this agent is associated with a network controller. We just want to show that we support all kinds of DPNs. And from the point of view of FPC, you could look at the network controller as a sophisticated DPN as well.
so this is Charlie again. All right, so what I really want to do is to get to some level of comfort that I know what you're talking about. And so when I look at that down pointing arrow at the top, what it could be interpreted to mean is that the agent, that multi-DPN agent, is driving the mobility control function, which has as one of its submodules a client that's actually, let's say, trying to get some service from the agent on the bottom that's a the top end or northbound interface to a network controller that has something on the southbound interface that looks remarkably like those agents on the right-hand side. So then we have a lot of terminology like agent, function, client, agent, controller, and they're not actually interchangeable, but if you asked me to go out of the room and write down what they meant, I would fail miserably because I just can't quite get, you might say, your meaning of what those are actually doing. And I want to know, what does that fat arrow mean? Is that simply a pointer to an example of a multi-DPN agent, or is the agent sitting on top trying to make or trying to drive the actual operation of the mobility control function.
So don't over interpret the arrow here. It could be a frame box around and just showing the deployment example. If you briefly can go one slide back. So this is what we specify in this draft, right? It's a functional architecture comprising an FPC client, which is associated with a control plane, and FPC agent, which is associated with a data plane. And now if we go back to the next slide. These are two deployment options. The agent can either be located on a single physical data plane node, that may be a switch, a router, or the agent is located on a network controller, which, as you correctly said, may be an SCN controller. In that case, the SCN controller does not handle only a physical single switch, right, but multiple switches below the SCN controller. These two deployment options is what we say. The agent is a single EPM agent, as it's a one-to-one mapping between an agent and a physical router. Or if it's located on the SDN controller, the agent is responsible to hold data associated with multiple physical data frameworks. So these are two different deployments. The protocol on this red line is the same.
So let me, if you don't mind, just try one more time. I'm going to try to reassociate those labels up there, and you tell me if I did it the right way. So in the case of the left-hand side, we have multi-DPN agent. It's not really in any kind of fat arrow association with that mobility function. What it really is you're saying that this diagram illustrates a multi-DPN agent because the multi-DPN agent is the agent that sits on the northbound interface of the network controller, and it has, as a result, the ability to manage the activities of multiple DPN agents that are underneath the network controller. Is that right?
Yes.
And if I did that right, then on the right-hand side, what we have is that fat arrow should go away again, but the mobility control function on top now itself, without any further agency, is managing the activities of multiple DPN agents. Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, I just want to submit that other people might have gotten different interpretations from the diagram, and at some level of abstraction. Currently, my feeling is that your draft is higher than that level of abstraction. It's really easy to get confused by the terminology.
Unfortunately, the fat arrow is not part of the draft, not the specification. Though we hope that the current version 4 and 5 in terms of writing clarify the terminology much better. If there is space for optimization, we would appreciate any kind of input here. Yeah, thanks. And
So John, actually you show that the data plane abstraction in the tenant environment, right? And it is just updated capability in this version, or originally it support tenant. That you show me that with figure. Originally that it support this virtual tenant environment. What I'm asking is that FPC is not enabler, the making this virtual tenant environments, right? Maybe this FPC is bringing on that something, virtual tenants, some frameworks, right?
I would say it's an enabling technology. So,
but how?
I think, yeah,
how
well,
FPC can enable this tenant environment, virtual tenants?
The concept, this is Satoru Matsushima. The concept of the tenant multi-tenancy, in FPC, just abstraction, abstracted topology, abstracted network. But in the real deployed network, which is derived to concrete forwarding policy, which is not shared between the tenant and domain. So then, that forwarding policy naturally divides all tenants, domain. We can assume that IPv6 network has IAB statement. So they have a unique address. It's easy to divide all of the tenant between them using separated forwarding policy to each of them.
because that yeah, I really want to know about this. So I'm trying to get to the point that, for example, what I know is about the virtual tenant creation is that, for example, in open source example, that there are some interpreter between this controller and the switch level that properly giving this comment from this controller to the proper switches to make that differentiated topologies like a flow visor or OVX approach. Is that right? Or just you mentioned about this OTL. So I was wondering that you are just running on this OTL virtual tenant frameworks or not to make this virtual tenant creation.
Yeah, I understand that. So the tenant contains some topology or node or policy data should be confined within the tenant, even that they share the same agent. But I think at least the namespace would be shared between the tenant. That show the capability of the real deployment data plane to be utilized of the tenant from a tenant side. So yeah, basically namespace and resource should be confined within each of the tenant on the demand agent, but at least the namespace for the common capability or policy will be shared between the tenants. That's what the FPC model shows. Right? You can find the data model written by Yang in the appendix section. So I think it would be good reference to understand the concept.
But actually it comes to me that it can do so. And I was just that want to know about some principle how this FPC can enable this virtual tenant environment. So maybe Yang model is just that modeling, right? Modeling description. So maybe that this principle to make this virtual tenant that is described in this written version.
I think the point about you can do is the only level how we should address this in the specification. Because my personal take is, and I appreciate the discussion, but I think it's a lot of different views now about slicing, how it's being implemented, deployed, also about multi-tenancy. So I think what the specification should be about is to be ready to support this. And I think version 5 does. That's some level. If we need modifications or extensions, we appreciate any input here. I'm not sure we should really go into the level of introducing slice identifiers or tenant identifiers.
Because sorry for interrupting, but the reason I ask is that because very clear that FPC is an enabler to create these virtual tenants environment, or FPC is just running on this something other solutions for tenant environment solution, and just the FPC just specifying on that given environment just to configure TPN node only does it. It was my questions.
I think the tenancy and the slicing kind of aspects are addressed by the identifiers which we introduced. So we have clients carrying identifiers, so multiple clients can be associated with different tenants sharing the same network controller, for example. And the data plane or the abstraction model introduces identifiers. So by means of treating these identifiers, I think the specification can be ready to support multi-tenancy and slicing, but we don't commit to having a certain group being specific and grouped only on a per slice basis. I think that the technology, the identification behind should allow all deployment and the flexibility to assign different abstracted nodes to a slice or a domain or a tenant or whatever you want.
Okay, so we've been on this for now enough. So could we actually bring this discussion to a mailing list? I didn't see this happening in the mailing list. It would be great to have it there. So let's please continue and finish the slides.
I think we can finish here. So there are a couple of slides about protocol overview. Maybe just this one that compared to version 3, which had 3 RPC calls for Model 1 and Model 2 having 24 RPC calls, we now converge to 2 calls, which is the config and the conf bundles. to handle everything, and which kind of operation is being performed is actually resolved and identified in this single RPC. So here's a lot of input from Lyle's implementation, how to really optimize this. And yeah, I think you can go through the draft, through the slides. And some of these message sequences, which are shown in the subsequent ones, they have been shown by Lyle also. So we would appreciate any feedback here if you think this is reasonably shaped and clear from the specification.
Okay. So what are your next steps on this draft? Do you think it's ready? Or
Ready for what?
I mean, is it stable now from the author's point of view? Obviously not from the rest of the working group. They have still some concerns or questions, but just like to know what you're going to do next, or what you want chairs to do next.
We don't intend to go up to version 10 without getting feedback from the working group, though we have a few minor things in mind which we need to clarify, because some paragraphs are still inherited from version 3 which need to be updated. They are not wrong, but I think they are not clear. What we definitely need is feedback from the working group if the specification is clear. And yeah,
Okay. So
if that happens in a working group last call or in a set of volunteers that actually provide.
Yeah, I just want to know whether I can move this to working group last call or give you some more time. So you need to ask that from me. I just want to point out that someone actually has implemented this stuff. It's up and running, so it cannot be completely broken. So someone out there is able to understand this and able to put actually that into a mobile core and run stuff with this. So which is kind of a good sign in general. But yeah, so okay. So I'm not going to push this into a working group last call immediately. So I'd like to have this discussion what happened just a few minutes ago to kind of replay and document it in the mailing list, because I think it shows points where the folks have different understanding, or they don't understand what is actually going on. So those things need to be kind of clarified, because if people that have been in this working group for a while have questions, that means that the readers that will read this document outside the working group will definitely have the same questions. So it's better to have those hashed out before we go forward. But honestly, I think that this document has done great improvements, and moved on, especially having an implementation and stuff behind. So.
Yeah, it would be good to receive comments on the general readability and also on the points about the terminology regarding slicing domains, so we can figure out quickly which kind of terms and description is most suitable, and yeah, not wait until IETF 98 for.
Yeah, so I would kind of want to see this go forward before IETF 98 or my retirement. So so anyway, so in the meanwhile, we should really push this forward, because I think that we are getting close that it's going to be just fine tuning around. Like the big changes have been done between 3 and 5. Like the big structural changes have been done. Okay.
You can bring this to hackathon actually and see if more clarification is needed to make it clear and consistent.
Yeah. Anyway, so the one. Okay, Dapeng has something to say.
Very quick comment. So in the definition of domain type, it mentioned that it specifies which types of communication allowed within the domain, such as IPv4, v6, v4, v6, and IEEE HO2. I think IEEE HO2, I guess what you mean is Ethernet, right? Because HO2 has many different, link layer technologies. .3, .11, even .15.
I could clarify that and update the thank you.
Okay, so regarding the license statement, as a chair, I would be very reluctant to send any license statement. So if you want this work to be part of the 3GGP, I would like each of you work for a real company, so you have also the 3GGP leg there, so you should be able to push that through. That's the way that you get it best addressed if you get the dependency. I know that this is now referenced in one of the CPDP document there, but I don't think it was kind of selected as a first choice.
This is Kiran. There is a side meeting on slicing tomorrow
Yep.
at 7 p.m. If you guys are interested, you could coordinate the work efforts there.
It would be great. Yeah.
All right, thank you. And then the last one, so Danny.
Okay, this draft is one of the drafts that are related to exposing user equipment to various mobility events and enabling them more influence on mobility events. It's quite an old draft. Last time I presented that in Argentina and received some comments from Suresh. And the latest version, I fixed the draft to comply with RFC 7227, mainly the IP prefix format, which I had to change. And I also changed the names of the IP continuity service types to what we agreed on the other draft, on the on-demand draft. So this is really all the work that I had left. I don't see any additional work, didn't receive any additional comments. It's a very short draft. And at this point, I'm asking for adoption of the document.
Okay, so so on the our charter, this falls into the part that discusses the exposing the mobility status and that stuff. So that is part of our charter. And for that matter, we already have a milestone for the on-demand mobility. So this would be the actual protocol exchange for that, the DHCP part. Okay. Now the question is, okay. Okay. My issue is like we have a bunch of documents to get out first. So, and I know this is kind of lame excuse pushing things. So, but definitely this work is within the scope what we are supposed to do. So, what I want to do now is like, all right, go ahead, Ransom.
I don't want to interrupt you.
Okay.
Okay, so actually I noticed that you talk about IA. So V6Ops recently published a document recommending against the user's DHCP6 address assignment only. So can you clarify, what the use case for those addresses obtained by IA are?
Okay. Wow. You're I think you're asking something without having a history of what we did in DMM. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. I read the draft just now, but I didn't. But I didn't have the history before.
Okay, so
because it talks about the requested address type, and some addresses have some. But I never want an address. I want a prefix. Don't ever give me an address as a mobile node, right?
So even if you want a prefix, and I guess you want to create your own addresses, there are some, I would say, properties of that prefix.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like why do we have this option for the addresses at all? because because normally if I get a 64 from the network, right? In many cases, I'll get a 64 from the network. Presumably, those addresses we can form as many as we want, and presumably those will have the same properties, right?
Yeah.
They'll share fate. So I don't see the use case specifically for the IPv6 address, not the prefix. The prefix I don't have an issue with.
I was not aware of that. I don't mind taking it out, but I thought that just for complicity, it seemed to me like it wouldn't be reasonable to enable DHCP to support requesting specific types of services via IP prefixes, but not enabling that through addresses. So I thought we should support both. And if I understand what you're saying is you don't believe that implementations will use the option to request a specific address with on-demand specific capabilities, just prefixes.
No, what I'm saying is that there's a best practice that says that networks that provide service to general purpose hosts like this one should use address assignment mechanisms that allow the host to form new addresses without asking.
Allow, but not require. I'm asking, for example, in DHCP v6, are you going to take out the ability to request an address?
The draft recommends that networks don't use that.
Well,
it recommends that my point is, if you want to assign one address to a UE that has a different property, assign a prefix.
I understand,
Yeah.
and I accept that. I don't mind. I don't mind about that. I'm just saying, if you take out from DHCP v6 the ability to request an address, then I'm fine. But if you leave that in, I feel
you don't have to use the SNTP option when I request an address, right? You don't have to send me when I request something address based. You don't require, I don't know, the whatever random option, the MTU option. You don't require that the MTU option be sent. So just don't support IA, for example. Yeah.
Okay. Suresh Krishnan. So I'll try to paraphrase Lorenzo. So maybe it's clear what he's trying to say, and he can correct me if I'm wrong. So what he's saying is, I think he's objecting to you using IA address. He's not objecting to you to use DHCP v6 or anything. But you are requiring putting it in IA address. So if you have it in IA prefix, then I think Lorenzo would be okay.
I understood that, and that's okay. I'm fine with that. I'm just asking, shouldn't I
Look at the recommendation. If you're bringing up right now, go to section 8. Recommendations.
I cannot bring.
Let me just ask, shouldn't DHCP support both alternatives, or are you?
Yeah, but it's not recommended that you use that. It supports it. You can do lots of things with DHCP. So if you want to go, if you have it on the screen, who has it on the screen? Go to section 8.
Where I need to go?
Section 8.
I cannot see it.
Down. Oh, sorry, down. Down? No, that's up. Down. Down, 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 down. Other down, sorry. Page down. No, up, sorry, up. There we are. Yeah. So the second paragraph is like, so it recommends that you basically, when you assign something, you give the host the ability to make as many as it wants, right? Which means that you can do it via Slack, you can do it by PD, but you can't do it via INA, because with INA, you have to ask every time.
I understand that. What you're saying is the recommendation is to use stateless assignment of addresses and not stateful assignment.
No, the prefix is fully stateful.
Of course.
Yeah.
I can.
You don't have to take it out. You can say it's no. You can link to this document and say that it's not recommended by this document, because it is not recommended, and this is a best current practice. So you can. That's a true statement.
I'm not married with that. It's okay to take it out. If the group feels it should be taken out, I'll take it out, and I will leave just the prefix, the ability to influence the type of prefix that UE receives. I just wanted to make sure that this is really what we want to do.
No, but that's why my question was about the address. Like, what's the use case of the address? And that's what I started. That's the question I started off with. What's the use case?
So
Right?
maybe I'll give you a simple example. If you look at cellular networks today, when you receive an IP address,
I never receive an IP address. I receive a 64. That was the question.
wait, okay. When you receive a 64,
Yeah.
It's guaranteed to be supported throughout the session, even when you move from one base station to another, right? And in order to support that, things need to happen in the network, right? Tunnels are formed and some manageability is done.
Yeah.
Well, some UEs don't require.
Yeah, this is expensive, you're saying. Yeah, no, so
Yeah.
my question, sorry, let me
So-
rephrase
so-
the question.
So the UE what we're doing here is we're enabling the UE to indicate to the network whether it needs the service or
Yeah,
not.
no, so, sorry, let me
That's-
rephrase my question.
Okay.
My question is, why would you ever do this on the basis of a single address as opposed to prefix? What is the use case that requires you to do this on
No
a
use
IPv6
case.
address basis?
No use case.
Right, that was the question.
Okay.
This is Alex Petrescu. So maybe you don't have such a use case,
But you do.
but I do have.
Okay.
So in that respect, I think that it's not so clear that one would have to remove the recommendation to use DHCPv6 for addresses.
Okay.
From
So
this
how
document.
about I make sure, and I think it's there, but I will double check that we support that with prefixes as well as individual addresses. And I can also add a link to this document indicating that the recommendation is to use prefixes. Is that fair?
Makes sense to me, but I would also like to add that this recommendation looks like a recommendation in some kinds of deployments. A smartphone was shown.
General purpose host, it says, is where that applies.
Well, I think that recommendation is wrong.
You could have said something when we was going through the working group.
Well, okay, so one person can do that many things that many times. So
You commented on that in that link, though. Like, you had lots of emails to me about it.
yeah, forgot what number is this? Yeah, but okay. This maybe I will comment. It's a RFC request for comments, so I will send the comments to the V6 ops.
Okay.
Your solution works for me, right?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I think like one recommendation is like for Alex to send your use case to the list, so the other people can at least see and make up their mind based on like what you send. And 7934 was like recently made RFC out like in the last few months, right? So it's like unfortunate timing if you come up with something that's against it, but like it was like very clearly considered by the IESG. Like we looked at like a lot of the options, and it does look like best current practice because like the document is very convincing. So if you've had a problem with that, like Lorenzo said, like it's a bit late, but of course, like we always hear comments. So if you think there's something wrong, yeah, feel free to talk about it, right? So you can write 7934 bis with like another additional paragraph, for example, right?
So that's back to my request. I will recheck the document and
Okay.
make the change. The question is that a pre-requirement for workgroup adoption? I don't believe.
Yeah,
so.
I would like to see that, but I can always sense the room because that gives me some kind of idea where things go. And you need to also keep in mind that not everything needs to happen in a face-to-face meeting. We can really do stuff also outside the face-to-face meeting. This is only 2 hours, like the thing we have several months with it. But I'd like to kind of, so this is not an adoption call, this is kind of straw man poll for me to understand what's the feeling of the room. So as I said, and earlier, that the work falls into a scope that we are supposed to be doing, whether that's that, and we got some really good feedback. Personally, myself, I had forgotten this one, the V6 ops thingy, but it doesn't, with the given like pointers and stuff, you can always progress this work. So the question from me is like who thinks that this work is something that this working group should actually go on and progress to completion. So if you think that this work is such, please raise your hand. I counted 6. Okay. And who think this we shouldn't be working on this particle solution? Please raise your hand. One scratching head, so that doesn't count. Okay. Okay. So please, based on the feedback, do the respin, and then we come back to this document, and hopefully we have also kind of cleaned our queue before that, and then we do the requested stuff.
Thank you.
All right. So looks like we have completed our agenda, which means that we are half an hour ahead of the schedule, and we don't need to kind of try to fill it. So so thank you, everybody.
Sorry, just one comment.
Okay.
That people finishing this. What about this? That yeah, as I said before, you need that. Also, would like to say unofficially that I remember in the meeting that once that the not current, the work charter item is being get resolved, that some further discussion for rechartering will be initiated, right? And so I remember that how it's going on for this rechartering issues.
So I didn't consider rechartering this meeting at all, just given that we just kind of spun out a couple of documents out of the working group. So and seeing how that progresses, and then I kind of get my courage and go to talk to AD about rechartering, because I really want to see that the current milestones are on their way out of the working group. We still have a couple of things that I want to push into a phase that it says that waiting for proto write-up or we have completed the working class goal.
Okay, so that the determination point is that all these current the pending items get this working group
Well,
as a goal.
let's say like they are really kind of stable. So, and for the lazy chairs, that means that you keep bugging us and you keep publishing the document and making sure that I don't need to see any trouble on like when I go and read it and say, oh, bogus, this doesn't work. So you need to do the work and push us that this is ready. So, and that's how it works. So,
okay.
And once we get this couple of things a bit better shape, we are going to respin the rechartering or whatever it takes. Okay. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks. It goes. You sent an update, right? It's done from your unless you get the comments from the ISG. Yeah. So it's done.
Well, there is a section in the FPC draft that really should cite the immunities. I will put that out in the morning. And by the way, this pen doesn't work. It came with the,
You want another one?
no,
So
I got
where are the proceeds?
I have the notes, but on I'll just send you the notes.